Oh, we are live. Webinar is now live. We are now streaming on Facebook. McKeel, we're like all over the world right now. And I'm using my headphones because I'm doing the porch casting thing this morning. And Siri keeps popping up on my laptop. See, she just did it again because I said her stupid name. So I'll have to keep her, out of our space as much as possible. So as people start rolling in, we got some attendees rolling in. Let's see who we got. Chip's on here. Deborah Weaver, you need to give me an update on your business. Joey, Kath, Mike, Taylor Brown, good to see you. So lots of people rolling in right now. We will record this. Everybody always asks, are you recording this? Are you recording this? Are you recording this? We are going to record this, and it will be in the recap. It'll also be posted up on the blog. Very, very cool day today. So I get to kind of hang with my buddy, McKeel Hagerty. He has joined us. He is, as I said in a Facebook post video this morning, one of those people that I look up to in a way because he always looks as the future is always brighter than the past. Like he's always chasing more knowledge, more learning, more experiences, more life. And that's kind of the way I look at things. I think it's rare for us to always be looking at tomorrow's brighter than yesterday. Now, how do I make it even brighter than that? So I want to quickly get you teed up here. And I know you've got a presentation you're going to get to everybody. McKeel Hagerty is the CEO and driving force behind, I swear Siri keeps popping there, behind Hagerty, the world's largest automotive lifestyle brand. And I'd love for you to talk a little bit about that. I'm sure you do a little bit in your presentation. Was also the global leadership or global membership chair, global chair for YPO, which is 28,000 chief executives from 130 countries around the world. And one of the things that he's going to talk to us about today is this idea of learning and continuously learning and improving. So McKeel, I want to get out of your way and get this to you. So if you got anything you want to say to kind of open it before you jump into your presentation, that'd be awesome.
You bet. Thanks, Andy. And by the way, the feeling is mutual. Ever since I met you, I knew I had a brother of sorts in this idea of kind of growth mindset, growing businesses by growing yourself and helping other people grow around you. And that's kind of how I live my life. And I find that the more, success I've come across, it makes me want to do even more of it because we all have to admit that there is a good factor of luck involved in all of our lives, good and bad sometimes, but that, the people that we tend to admire the most are the ones that make the most of the luck that they get, the positive luck that they have. Totally it's, as Jim Collins calls it, the return on luck, right? And that's definitely a factor. I think I've done better than many in my return on luck because luck is there. And also all the hard work and, great things that, we've had going for us to create a little bit of a run in this life that's been fascinating. I've been a CEO of a business in the automotive space and the insurance financial services space for a long time. I mean, really like fully in this seat since 2000. It was a family business. It was about the year I joined YPO. My time leading Hagerty and my time in YPO kind of, they've been in sync, interestingly. YPO is a global leadership organization of medium to larger companies. Averages about 250 employees and up to some of the largest companies in the world, almost 30,000 members now. And I live in Michigan, northern Michigan, growing my family business, took it over, like I said, kind of 1999, really fully as CEO in 2000. And I did not have a business education. I thought I was going to be an academic when I was younger. Loved school, loved education, loved the idea of seeking degrees. And I always thought I'd be at this point a philosophy professor because I did study philosophy and English literature as an undergrad. Then I went to a Russian Orthodox seminary for a few years, got my master's degree, and then I sought my doctoral work in ancient philosophy at Boston College and classics. And classics is it's an old field, basically Greek and Latin literature. I didn't finish my PhD because I left. I didn't think the world for me. I was an entrepreneur. I had a bunch of businesses all the way. And I felt like I wanted a bigger world than just publishing books that no one would ever read and doing stuff. So business has been a great source for me. My biggest concern about going into business instead of academia was that I thought it'd be boring. Because I actually love the ideas that I was being exposed to in the academic world. And I didn't realize that, in fact, hey, by the way, if you have a business, you can shape it to be any way you want to make it. You can turn it into a learning business. You can surround yourself with great people. You can go to great conferences. You can do all sorts of great stuff. And so, joined YPO, suddenly got to look under the hood of all these other great businesses, meet a lot of interesting CEOs, started traveling globally, took on a couple of officer roles in YPO in Michigan and then in the Midwest, and ended up joining the global board of YPO, and eventually 2016 was elected global chairman, where I traveled during that period of time. I was on the board of YPO to almost 40 countries. I met a lot of heads of state. I met a lot of amazing leaders. And, I just kept finding my people. I kept finding more and more of my people, like you and me, Andy, learners, growers, people who wanted to do more, and found their spark in learning, and by not just, having their curiosity kind of be a fun table topic thing over dinner, but something that you really build your whole life around. So I want to share some leadership ideas, and then I want to talk a little bit about learning specifically. I have some slides. My slides are not, my slides are meant to be kind of entertaining, to kind of spur conversation. So when I go into it, Andy, because I'll be kind of in full screen mode, if anybody's got a question, send them to Andy. Andy can interrupt me anytime. I am not easily taken off task. So just go ahead, interrupt me, talk to me.
I'll press the button. I'll press the button down here. You'll get a shock, and then we'll pull it right back. So any questions you may have, you can stick that in Q&A or chat, and I'll grab that on my side.
All right, ready to rock then. I'm going to kind of roll through this. I'm going to talk a little bit about 2020, because I think an awful lot of us have been, how can you not be thinking about 2020? It's been such an amazing year. And it's all the more reason I'm going to make sure I have this absolutely right before I get started. Andy, what are you seeing right now? You seeing the leadership skill above all others?
Solid. You're yes. Perfect.
Okay. Well, everybody, I believe there is a leadership skill above all others, and I'll mention a few other leadership skills along the way. But if you want to hear more about it, that's a discussion for another talk show. So let's get into 2020 and why it is, I think, even more important that we all kind of double down on our learning and our natural curiosity, which I'll describe as a muscle that we need to build. So 2020 is being described, as kind of for many, a hellish year of disruptions. I like to think positively, as Andy described, and I certainly think it is a year of accelerations. I don't know what industries you're all in, but pick the top 2, 3, 4, 5 trends you would have seen in any of your industries, whether it's, healthcare or manufacturing or financial services like me, or retail, and whatever thing you dreamed of, either good or bad, that was going to be happening out 7, 8, 10 years from now, it all came 7, 8, 10 months in one 7 or 8, 10 month period, and it's happening all at once. And the reality is, if you think about it, as we think about most change in our lives, is that most change in our life, when it's positive, it kind of looks like this, right? We're walking along and it looks like this nice sunny slope up, and you got a smile on your face because you're just thinking, I got this, right? No problem. And that's true. The reality is these kind of accelerations aren't linear changes. They become exponential. And the problem with the human mind can do so much, and I'm going to talk about that when I get into learning, but it doesn't deal well with exponentials, because it starts to, the growth starts to look vertical. And all of a sudden you're like, okay, well, that nice slope is suddenly really steep. How am I going to get up it? And then you suddenly realize, excuse me, but oh shit, here, my God, that's not just a little slope up, that's a wall. How am I going to climb this wall? And that's what big change looks like, especially if you're in an industry that's being massively disrupted right now. Maybe you were kind of on top of that growth curve until you weren't. And that's the other side of this too, right? Because sometimes, even when things are kind of declining and you think you have it, it kind of goes the same way. You're walking along, you think you got it, suddenly you realize, well, that's a pretty steep hill. And then you suddenly realize it's not a hill, it's a cliff. And so major changes in our world right now, whether they're positive or negative, can both look like a wall going down or a wall going up. And the job of the leader is to put some context around it, is to try to put some understanding in it. Now, I don't know how many people have heard of this term here, which is VUCA, which is that, the reality of the modern world right now is VUCA, is that it's volatile, it's uncertain, it's complex, and it's ambiguous. And if anybody's as upset about, say, the current state of American politics right now, it looks volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous, because that's what the world looks like. And that's what changes look like when we're facing them. So the reality is an awful lot of us look at 2020 and it just feels like we got punched in the face. And you had a great plan, you went into it. And by the way, for some of you in manufacturing out there, if you had any kind of global supply chain before COVID, you're already facing a financial crisis because of the trade issues. Then you had COVID. Then you had the resultant financial effect of COVID. Then you had, social unrest, which leads to it's a challenge for all of us leaders to adapt ourselves to and get on top of. By the way, those changes were coming. They're just accelerated as a result of all of this. Now, a couple of years ago, one of the leaders I spent some time with was the famous tennis player Billie Jean King. And she said one of the reasons she believes that she was able to stay on top of her game as a champion a little bit more than most in her era was that she never looked as failure or a bad shot or a loss as a failure. It was always feedback. And I think that how you have to look at life in a period of time like this, especially if you want to kind of get back on top of it, if you feel like it's kind of dealing with you, if the VUCA is all over you, is that you got to look at failure as feedback. And she always said that if I served and it was a little bit long, I never got emotional about it. It's just a little piece of feedback. So what does this mean for us as leaders? And every single one of you, no matter what you're doing in life right now, you're a leader. You're a leader in your own life. You're a leader with the people around you, your friends. You're a leader in your organizations, and you're a leader in the future organizations you'll be involved with. I can tell you, when I have talked to a lot of my peers around the world who are leaders on a global stage, I think one of the major lessons of 2020 has been we've been rethinking like what is absolutely necessary in our lives. How many of us have recalibrated what we thought was necessary before maybe isn't as necessary anymore? The desire to or the need to maybe live with a little bit less, be a little bit more essential about the things that we care about, or maybe think differently about our future. I think that's great. I have heard a lot of people had their value sets be challenged. I know I have. I've rethought like some of the things that I valued. I have a pretty rigorous annual one-page planning process that I share with people like Andy. And I talk a lot about values because it helps me solidify them. Mine have been rattled this year. A lot of people have, positively and negatively. Rattled meaning maybe reinforced, but also rattled negatively. Things I thought were super important weren't as important. And then obviously as a society, because I think the best leaders aren't just about their own success and their own individual fulfillment, but about the people around them, is what do we value? And I have this little tiny nuance in my life, which is I separate principles from values. I have a lot of principles that I live by. Like I like fitness. I like a bunch of, they're habits and things I built into my life, but values I think are shared. And I think that we're having some pretty interesting challenges to our shared value sets in society right now. I know businesses are having to rethink even what the purpose of business is. It certainly can't just be about making money. It's got to have impact for its employees in all domains of their life. And it needs to make a positive community impact, or guess what? Get ready to face disruption, like falling off the cliff, like my little stick figure back there. And then, kind of back, thinking about the Billie Jean King ideas, like what are some of the other things is, kind of ask yourself, what feedback am I getting? What has 2020 done for me from a feedback perspective? What were the things that I was actively involved with before that I'm not, it's less important to me anymore. And then finally, what lessons am I learning from all of this? I think that we've all learned a bunch of lessons, and that we might approach future, major issues, opportunities. By the way, some businesses are absolutely flourishing during this period of time. Many are really, really struggling. But no matter what, you need to be looking at it as feedback, and you need to be looking at it as lessons. Now, whenever I do some of these in more of a workshop setting, by the way, I'm going to be sending a worksheet for everybody here. If you're interested, you can download it. But I also suggest some kind of journaling questions that I often recommend journaling. I keep both a diary and a journal. A diary is a list of things you did in a day. A journal is the things you talk about, you're talking yourself towards, that you're thinking about, that you're reflecting on, not ruminating on it. Ruminating is that you can't get worry out of your head.
Right.
So for me, thinking, and I'll send these along to you that you can maybe write these down in your own journal processes, and these are pretty obvious. I don't want to spend a lot of time on them now, but thinking about what have you reset, what you think is necessary in your life, how have your values been challenged or been reinforced? What feedback is the world giving me about the choices I've made? I'm a big about personal choice, that most everything that happens to us, even though luck does happen, good and bad, a lot of it is a result of choices we made. And what are those major lessons? If you're not thinking that this isn't one of the biggest years to be chalking up your major lessons, you don't have it quite right. It's going to be a great time for me for a couple of cocktails over New Year's and Christmas, and really be thinking deeply about it.
Yeah, we got a question around
Sure.
journaling. Just can you walk through maybe your routine of that? How much time do you spend doing it? When do you do it? What does that look like? I think
Yeah,
people.
I have both a morning and an evening thing. By the end of the night, I'm pretty tired. I leave it all on the field. I get up real early. I'm up latest 5 a.m. and my wife and I have coffee, stretch, and meditate together. So it makes it a lot easier to knock that out before we have our workout. I do my journaling then, right after I've meditated, sometimes before, sometimes after I work out. So I'm kind of clear-headed, and I can journal about major topics. Sometimes I write the topic I want to write down the night before, but then I'm just like absolutely at my sharpest. I'm caffeinated, I've stretched, I've meditated, and I'm ready to rock. At night, I do my diary routine, which is just, this is what I did today. I met with so-and-so, good progress, fun to talk to my daughters, whatever it is. That's kind of how I view it, because I just don't have time to like compose deep thoughts late at night. I can tell you, it's probably once a quarter at night do I ever sit down and write much. It's always a pretty quick check off. Does that make sense?
Totally. Thanks
Okay.
for sharing that, man.
So as we start our shift towards learning, I read a lot, and I'll talk a lot about books I read. I don't finish every book. Back when I thought I was going to be a philosophy professor, I thought I had to finish every book. So I have a kind of a culling process that I go through, and I'll talk about my own reading hacks, and I'll share with you. Before I read a book, I've taken a good look at a book at least 3 or 4 different ways before I'd actually commit to spending the time. But one of the great rereads I did this year was I started rereading some of my old science fiction buddy, Isaac Asimov. And he was obviously a huge proponent of science. And he had this notion that where the big aha moments come in life, the big discoveries that happen in the world, it's not, aha, I got it. It's actually, whoa, that's interesting. That right there, folks, is actually scientific discovery. For people who are aware, and they're aware of what's going on around them, and they're aware of themselves, it's never, aha. It's, oh, that's interesting. Because something one time that you observe inside your thinking in somebody else is different than you thought it was, or different than your preconceived notions. This is the basis for self-discovery. And, look, I believe in education. I believe in degree getting. But I just don't think right now, in the current state of education, and I'm not trying to hack on the idea of credentialing, because I think it's important, and I want kids to be able to continue to be able to be credentialed, it's the idea of becoming a lifelong learner, rather than just seeking degrees that becomes infinitely more exciting. And for me, when I dropped out of my doctoral program, it was really a decision it was the end of my education and the beginning of my learning. I had always been curious. I had always been interested in, well, that's interesting moments, but it was this idea that I could take on and take responsibility for my own learning rather than needing a degree, but to start owning up to the fact that I was responsible for the ideas that I was going to be shaping my life with. So these are some of the books, for example, I read during my YPO chairman time to get myself ready to travel around the world and talk to world leaders and different business people from different cultures I had never been exposed to. And it was, unbelievably helpful to be able to read quickly and to be able to go through a lot. But this didn't just happen overnight. It took a long time to get there. So when I think about this difference, that learning is something you do for yourself and education is something that's done for you, is I realize that the real aim of life is wisdom. And wisdom is not a product of schooling. Wisdom is a product of a lifelong attempt to acquire it. It's a process, right? And so when you really think about where this starts, wisdom, that's interesting, is it starts with this idea of building the habit of curiosity. And I think that curiosity, not just to be this sort of Cliff character on Cheers, which is kind of a know-it-all that can spout off useless facts, but really being curious about things. And I'll explain why it's important that we learn, that we use our curiosity to explain things. It's not just to have that, oh, well, that's interesting moment to be able to explain them, but curiosity is a habit that you build. Wisdom is the state of mind that you're trying to seek, right? It's that process that we're talking about. And then really growth is the aim, because everything I'm talking about is that in a world filled with VUCA, right? With all of the challenges, going on there that make it complex and make it ambiguous and make it volatile. If you approach this, if you create a habit of curiosity with a mindset that's going to be about seeking wisdom, and with growth being the aim, you can truly achieve great things even in a VUCA time, which is this time right now that some of us feels like it's punching us in the face. So Andy, anything else right now, or shall I rock on into it and then we can go from there?
Keep moving. What came to mind for me was the word commencement. You had the graduation ceremony and the commencement. Commencement is the beginning. It's not, it's maybe the end of this particular chapter, but it's the beginning of learning for the rest of your life.
Well, that's right. And you have to take it on. You have to take it on yourself, and you got to have a strategy for it. Because, I think one of the biggest problems that I see, for example, with a lot of the polarization going on in the world right now, and not just about politics, but around business and everything else, it's people entrenching themselves in their past knowledge, entrenching themselves in their perspective, lacking curiosity of being actually willing to understand what somebody else is thinking or even asking. It's a sign of a lack of resilience. And it's actually a sign of, I think when people only have one idea, that they think of everything through a single lens and they throw at you, it is such a sign of lack of confidence in themselves. It's just unbelievable. But I think it's how the brain works, right? And that's kind of what I want to talk about a little bit. When I think about learning, and when I talk about learning for other leaders, is that I always start with one thing. Hey, what's the brain for? Like not your mind, because I'll talk about the mind in a minute. What's your brain for? The actual thing inside your skull. And you really got to ask yourself, what's this thing for? Well, first and foremost, if you look at how it's wired, and if you even as an amateur, if you read about brain science, what's it wired for? First and foremost, it's wired for survival. Okay. The brain is wired with this head. By the way, we're Homo sapiens are really smart creatures. But the biggest parts of our brain and the most active parts of our brain are the ones that help us survive. Okay. So it helps us see patterns. It's all about pattern recognition. It's about seeing threats. And in fact, in many ways, we have this, as somebody once said, why does it feel so weird right now? It's like, well, we have this, brain from the Stone Age. We have institutions from the Middle Ages. And, we're dealing with situations right now that are just accelerating faster and faster. And so half the reason now and then, if you've ever seen somebody have an overreaction to maybe a negative review of a PowerPoint they gave, is because the part of their brain that's activated is the part that would have kept them alive 10,000 years ago when, saber-toothed tiger was coming out of the, forest after them. And so this idea of pattern recognition, and then followed by what's the brain for? Again, continuation of the species, to be able to find a partner to continue the species on. And then ultimately there are very strong pleasure-seeking parts of the brain, which is that we want to survive. We want to continue by recognizing patterns. We want to continue the species, and we want to seek pleasure. And that's about it. And everything else actually requires higher orders of thinking. And that's where the mind comes in. We're just talking about the brain right now, but just think about then how is the brain of the leader, not just the brain of every Homo sapien, but what is the brain of the leader for? And what does it have to do differently than just for those simple things? Well, by the way, it's all the same stuff. You just have to do it for more people. If you think about what leading is that, you take everything that you want to have, which is ideally that idea of maybe it culminates in this idea of, okay, survival through pattern recognition, continuation of the species, and pleasure seeking. And maybe that all adds up to individual fulfillment. And there you are on the beach having some sort of umbrella drink of your choice. But now you got it. Now you're responsible for other people. You're responsible for your family. You're responsible for your team. You're responsible for your organization. You're responsible for your business. Imagine what it would be like to be responsible for a whole country. So, what I started thinking about is that there are these things that the leader brain has to get really good at, and they're kind of meta, right? Like they kind of exist above every other skill. That's what meta means, meta in Greek, is that I would put it this way. First and foremost, the number one meta skill, if you will, of a leader, and it's the why I say this is the one trait that none of us can live without, is fostering curiosity and learning. It's number one. If you can do this, you can do almost everything else, but it's a habit you have to build, and we'll be talking about it. The second thing is what I call the executive function. Many of you already are executives. You're a vice president somewhere. Maybe you're a CEO. Whatever you are, you're a leader. Well, what it is to be a leader is, one, you have to be able to see patterns. Remember, we talked about pattern recognition, but then you have to make decisions, not just on behalf of yourself, but on behalf of other people. The term executive, the definition of executive actually means to make decisions. And so this idea of, one, being curious and learning, two, being able to discern things, which is to be able to make sense of things in a wise way and then decide, not just on behalf of you and others. The third one is communicating, which I describe as giving context. And by the way, when you become a leader of a team, you're a leader of a family, you don't just, you're telling stories, right? The way human beings convey complex information to each other is to tell stories. When people talk about myths, well, aren't they silly? They're not silly at all. If you actually look at them, the ancient myths, they're actually, they didn't have all the scientific equipment to figure it all out. They were actually explaining very complex things, and they did it by giving context. We give context as well every single day when you lead a team, which is, hey, imagine asking a basketball team to play really hard for you. You're the coach now, but you're not going to tell them how long the game is, what the winning score is, or how well they performed, right? But yet what you really hope is that they go play really hard for you. You're the coach, right? Well, how do you think that's going to go? You haven't given them the context of what success looks like. So we as leaders create the context of success, and the best of them do the best job of it. Folks, here we are, we're together, we can do this. This is what success is going to look like. And I'm going to tell you a story about how we're going to get there. That's what leaders do. So the leader brain, remember, about not just survival pattern recognition, fostering, deciding, but then being able to create story. Now we're starting to talk about higher order thought, and being able to go out there. And then really finally, I believe the ultimate, meta skill for any leader is relationship building and networking. You don't live in it alone. I think one of the greatest myths of success is that somehow it's you alone in an arena and you get paid for it, or you're somehow successful. No, the highest, the best leaders I have ever met are the best relationship builders, and they own up to it. They're constantly checking themselves. How am I building relationships? How am I, what are the skills I need to use? In another talk, maybe sometime I'll talk about what are the skills of trust building? What are the skills of networking that the best leaders use out there in terms of vulnerability and everything else, and in creating sort of consistent ways that people can think about you. So again, this is how these are the major things that and we're going to focus just on the top couple of them, which is curiosity and learning. But these are the other things that every leader is responsible for. So fostering curiosity, before we kind of go a little bit deeper into it, and to me, again, as I described it, it's not just something that just accidentally happens to you. Curiosity is a habit. It's a muscle. It's something you have to build. You have to be willing to sometimes go out there a little bit on a limb. And to me, I define it in my own mind as being open to ideas, ideas that may not align with ideas that you had before. Remember, it's that, well, that's interesting. Or wow, okay, I had not thought about that before, or that way, or maybe taking an opposing point of view. They say the truest sign of high intelligence is the ability to hold opposing thoughts in your mind and to consider them carefully without just automatically going to the one that you immediately agree with. And then I also describe it as emotional flexibility. Most people who I believe foster the kind of curiosity that makes them a good leader, they have the emotional flexibility to be able to deal with different situations without just letting them melt, without melting themselves down during the whole process. So it's this idea of fostering a leadership mindset of curiosity. And then finally, or not finally, but the second part of this, and I do think that it goes well with, just general curiosity, is this idea of what are the discernment characteristics of a leader out of their curiosity and learning. And I believe it's kind of a reliable perspective. Most leaders that I know that are highly regarded tend to be pretty consistent, pretty reliable with finding their perspective. Yes, they're constantly upgrading their learning, upgrading their knowledge. They're willing to take in more information to see if they can make their understanding or their decisions better, but they have pretty reliable perspective. I would describe it as not just self-aware, but they're pretty aware of the world around them, and they can actually explain their thinking, which I'll go into. And then they would, in general, be described as being pretty wise judges of the decisions that they make. The best leaders, kind of go as, maybe they took it took a little courage there, but they were pretty wise in the decisions that they made out there about the decisions that they were making as an executive. Now, again, I'll send these all to you for journal questions. I find them interesting. And again, I think it's especially important this year. I didn't talk about biases, but I'll mention them here in a few minutes, which is how aware am I of my biases. We have a mind, by the way. Each and every one of us has a mind. But as I'll go into it, our mind can play tricks on us. And it's really important that we understand how they do play tricks on us. And starting to learn some of these things about the learning leadership meta skills, which is, how does somebody look at my perspective? Do I make wise judgments? How do I best communicate? Some people aren't the best public speakers. Sometimes people aren't the best writers, whatever it is. But learning and practicing your communication skills will be critical in those storytelling areas. How do I discuss my principles and values with others? As I described earlier around principles and values, that becomes pretty important if you want to engender trust, because trust building ultimately is how leaders relate to each other. So anything come to mind right now, Andy, before I kind of go into my own learning hacks and how to think about it? Sure.
Absolutely. So one question that I kind of have is, I like the 4 things, right, that a leader should be focused on themselves. And I know there's not too many leaders that don't have other leaders on their team. I know your team has many leaders on it.
Yep.
How do you transition from this idea of always thinking in these terms for yourself and getting them to do the same?
Yeah. Well, and I'll go into this in a little bit, but I think you have to foster a culture, whether it's on an individual team, you have to, or whether it's for your whole organization, is foster a culture of curiosity where different ideas are okay, and that you're, again, as I described it, kind of emotionally resilient enough to take in different perspectives, not just react against them all the time, and that you actually allow this stuff to happen. And whether it's a book club that somebody puts on, whether you ask people who have a lot of domain knowledge in your organization to come and present different ideas or different things they're thinking about. There's not a business out there, I think, an industry, for example, right now that isn't probably facing some sort of digital disruption. Andy, we hired a pretty key player on our team, Kelly Smith, came out of Starbucks and out of MGM, big hire, big perspective, very creative person, very visionary. And one of the things I've really encouraged him to do is teach us, because otherwise it's just going to be like, we're not really sure necessarily what you're thinking. Kelly, teach us. And right. So he's been doing these kind of like Zoom recorded videos where he goes, here's something we're working on. This is how I'm thinking about it. Here's what the best businesses do in these areas. And then just boom, he did one today. It was 1 minute and 46 seconds. Sometimes it's 12 minutes. Sometimes it's 17 minutes. It's just fostering those types of things so that people know if there are a bunch of meta skills we have to learn as leaders, and learning is number one, then you better get comfortable with talking about ideas and not just about tasks that you have to do in your business. Because I think, when we're rushed or when a crisis is happening, like everything goes out the window because you're just, it's like a 3-alarm fire. And I think that's one of the things that I've really done. I mean, learning was important to me. And that's why, I believe our business is at least 10 times the size it ever could have been had we not actually introduced this culture of curiosity in it. Does that make sense?
Totally. So the idea being you're going to grab pieces of learning and figure out how to get those pieces of learning into the rest of the organization in And that can come from, in your case, Kelly, or it could come from anybody in your organization.
Yeah. I mean,
be willing to share.
It's sharing articles, it's doing stuff, but you got to make room, you got to make time. And you have to make it okay for people to kind of bring different ideas. Not like you want to make people do book reports, because then it starts kind of looking like school. And I don't, you don't want to necessarily make it like school, but I do think you want to realize that, you know, if you really want to go and learn and grow and deal with all the VUCA that's out there, then the only way past it is learning and growth. Otherwise, you're just hoping for luck, or some sort of flash. And so, you know, I think that's the way to go for it.
Well, everybody wants to learn. Let's see these hacks so we can do it faster and better.
Yeah. So real quick, I'll go through some of it. You know, again, back to the brain. Remember, the brain's kind of the hardware, right? Our software are the tools that we plug into it, that run on that hardware, to be able to kind of move things. So a couple things I want to talk about: ideas and how memory works. Well, first and foremost, it's important to remember that the mind is like a Swiss Army knife, and that is, you know, if you only use the knife, or you only use the saw, or you only use the corkscrew, or you only use the bottle opener, that's all you're going to get, right? And so it's really important to remember that there are a lot of different parts of your mind, and you have to use. There's creative parts of your mind, there's rational parts, there's communicative parts. You know, there's all sorts of things. There's the emotional pieces. We're not just thinking beings, we're feeling beings, and that all goes into the communication style. But one of the problems, like right up front, that I find when I try to introduce a lot of books and different things to people, is that they really worry about their memories. Well, I don't have a very good memory for remembering things, because we're not just a Swiss Army knife. The mind is also like a sieve, right? And a sieve is, you know, right? It's like a colander for anybody who doesn't know what a sieve is. Water just pours right through it, right? Just like ideas just pour right through it. And I remember seeing this pyramid years ago, which is, you know, kind of, it's this kind of core idea. And that is, there's a difference between active and passive learning. And if you start at the top and you realize, a lot of people, if they just read a book, they only get about 10% of what they read. If they hear the words, they get about 20% of what they hear. And then seeing, they get about 30% of what they hear. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit about my reading hacks in a few minutes. But people actually get a little bit more, believe it or not. That's why they can remember movies easier than they can often remember a book they read. Unless you're really a careful reader, or like reading that I know I need to really remember. I read in a Kindle, I highlight, I reload the notes from my Kindle page into a note page. I write a summary. So I've touched the content a bunch of times. But seeing a movie, right? We all can remember, oh, remember when Russell Crowe did this in Gladiator? You know, why don't people know when they're defeated? Right? Yeah, it's one of my favorite lines from the early. How do I remember that? Because it's, you know, just this is what you learn. Participating in a discussion about the ideas. Again, that idea of fostering a culture where you talk about ideas, you start retaining about 70% of what we say, and then doing dramatic presentations, asking people to teach, creating an environment. So if you want to deal with memory, and books are important, and if, by the way, you want to get some of those ideas of books, from books, into your organization, into your family, into business, then you're going to ask people to go do more than just read it. You're going to have places to discuss it, and you're going to have places where people talk about it, and you're going to have places where they ultimately present it. Ultimately, I also believe that when it comes to when you want to learn a new subject, is that memory is reinforced by meaning. So trying to learn something that you just don't give a darn about is really hard. I mean, it's why rote memorization in school, you work your tail off, you take the test, and you can't remember any of it 10 minutes later because you didn't care about it. But the stuff that we really work carefully toward is something that is reinforced by meaning. So starting with memory when we get down into learning is, remember, find stuff, touch it in as many ways as you can, and find stuff that you really care about, because memory will be reinforced by you making it meaningful in your lives in some way. Now, moving on to another idea about like how ideas function in our life. This is one of the books I'll recommend, called The Rational Optimist. It's both it's a book about ideas, and it's a book about how prosperity works, how markets work, and how ideas survive. And another one is a book by David Deutsch, which I'll talk about, and which is this. We are, as human beings, universal explainers. Remember when I talked about the human brain being about pattern recognition, is that we're constantly coming up with reasons to explain things, and we explain them better and better and better. And by the way, many of the things that are truest in life, you can never truly observe. So for example, think about it. I am not a big physics person or whatever, or a big scientist in many ways. And so right now, there's not a human being alive that can actually observe what's going on in the center of our sun, in our solar system, right? Everything is observed at a distance, secondhand, using scientific instruments. And every year, our explanations of what's going on in the in the middle of the sun gets a better and better and better explanation. If you think about it, for example, with physics, back when we only had Isaac Newton's physics, Isaac Newton's physics was just fine for simple things like an apple falling out of a tree, the projectile or the arc of a projectile like a bullet or ballistics artillery. But once you start getting into things that are either very small or moving very, very fast, Newtonian physics didn't work anymore. So along comes Einstein, right? And Einstein, it didn't do away with the Newtonian explanation. It just layered on top of it. It could explain more than what Newtonian physics could. We're universal explainers. And by the way, towards the end of his life, Einstein knew he didn't have it all figured out. He knew there was something that was referred to as action at a distance. And had he lived probably another decade, he probably would have defined quantum physics. So it took a next generation to be able to come along. Every year, we explain something better and better. And that's what we do as leaders, as learners. In that rational optimist, you also realize that knowledge is collective and it's cumulative. Andy, you and I did this amazing hike up this mountain this summer, but the best thing about it is we didn't have to learn everything about it ourselves. We had a companion, a friend, a buddy, a guide. We had all this great equipment. We didn't have to invent the equipment ourselves. We got to go buy it in a store. We had the benefit of all the previous knowledge of almost everybody else that went up that mountain, what path to take, what gear to wear, what to eat, how to sleep, how to train. We trained for that thing for months. And if we didn't have all of that, we would have had a worse day than we had. right?
Yeah.
So, remember, we're universal explainers. Knowledge is collective and cumulative. We benefit from the knowledge of others without having to relearn it ourselves. And then finally, it's never really complete, right? So here's how I look at it. You got to have an aim of what it is you're trying to learn. And so I believe first and foremost that talents are not innate. We build on our talents, and we may have some, but that we have to work on them. You have to learn to love practice, because what you're trying to get to here is not perfection. You're trying to get to a functional high level of performance in almost everything in your life. Okay. I also think it's super important that you choose things that you care about. I talked about memory comes from meaning. If you don't care about the violin, don't try to learn the violin. If you don't care about bird watching, don't waste time trying to learn about bird watching. Find something that you care about. You're going to have to develop deliberate practice. If there's anything that of the bookshelf full of books about learning that I've read back there, the idea of deliberate practice is critical. Not just randomly playing the guitar. You got to actually go practice something on the guitar, which is it's been my go-to release during COVID, is starting to take guitar lessons again, although virtually, having a deliberate practice. So I know what I'm going to do. It's also a heck of a lot easier to get a functional high level skill at something if it's in a field with a proven bunch of performers in it. Okay. If you're trying to make something up that's never been done before, it's hard to figure out who your coaches and teachers are going to be. It's probably a lot easier to figure out how to play the guitar than it is to figure out how to play, I don't know, pick something really obscure that hardly ever exists. The guitar harp, which is a combination instrument. There are only dozen or so people on the planet who probably play it. Really hard. There's not that much of a track record of people who play it, because you're going to have to kind of learn how to play it yourself. Finding a coach and teacher, and I get to the coach and teacher thing, and then I'm going to describe getting to super learners. I'll go a little bit more into it in a minute. So why learn to love practice, right? What is the importance of practice? Well, every single high performer we all probably know and admire, and they just make it look so easy. Look at a Steph Curry shooting a 3-pointer. Or you look at my late great hero Eddie Van Halen, who just passed away 10 years ago, who, by the way, admitted that when he was in high school, he spent 12 to 18 hours a day practicing the guitar. He made it look easy. Anybody who actually performs at a really, really high level practices more than you ever think. I remember when I was getting ready for my YPO global chairmanship, I knew I was going to be giving lots of speeches, hundreds a month in many cases. is that I knew while I like to speak, and I've been told that I have a pretty good facility for it, I also really practiced. And I got coaching and I got feedback and I got all sorts of things, but I was practicing all the time, but I deliberately practiced. I practiced my intros, I practiced my closings, I practiced giving points, I practiced working off of slides. I wasn't just kind of giving the same speech, stump speech over and over again. And that idea of learning to love the practice, because you want to know why? Eventually, it kind of becomes certain parts of doing things over and over again becomes boring. And one of the biggest things about becoming a winner is that you've got to be able to work through the boring periods of practice in your life, because it is going to get boring. And you have these long plateaus before your next gain comes along the way. You know, at first, when you take something up, your learning curve is great. It feels awesome. And then it starts tapering. That's when a lot of people quit, or they just keep themselves at that level. So learning to love practice of learning something becomes really important. And you know, in that book Peak, it talks about it like what happens when you practice and you have deliberate practice and you keep at it for long periods of time, you become incredibly adaptable. You know, the ability to have that neuroplasticity where you can think about multiple things, the ability to describe things in very, very vivid ways and have incredible creativity. It all comes from kind of the mastery of being able to do things over and over and over again. Another thing about learning is that, and I talked about one of the leadership meta skills, is learning how to make better decisions. I think that every single leader needs to spend a little bit of time thinking about thinking. And I know that sounds weird, but if there's a single book that I've read this year that I think every leader should read, or at least read the first chapter, and it's a book called Thinking in Bets, Making Smarter Decisions When You Don't Have All the Facts, because that's life, right? Most every major decision we're going to make in life, you're not going to have all the facts. You're not going to be able to have a perfect explanation. And Annie Duke was a professional poker player who realized poker is a lot like life. It's not like chess. Life is not like chess, where you can see the perfect chessboard and you can see your opponent moving the chess pieces. The thing about why poker is like life is that you dealt your hand and then you have a good idea of what your probabilities are, and then luck happens. And that's like life. And what she makes you realize is that if you could separate your decision making from the outcomes, it like sets you free. This first chapter of this book absolutely set me free, and it made me realize that we're always thinking in bets. We just think that we're dealing with perfect knowledge all the time, and we generally aren't. The second book that I think is really important for a lifelong learner about thinking is this is the holy grail right here. This is Danny Kahneman's Thinking Fast and Slow. Now, he won the Nobel Prize for his work with his late partner, Amos Tversky. And this is about the fact that we have two ways of thinking. We have the quick way, boom. This is my reaction versus the slow, deliberate way. And what we understand is that when our mind plays tricks on us, we have to be able to balance our quick reaction. No, that's a bunch of nonsense. Versus, remember what I described, that idea of slowing down and saying like, maybe there is another way to think about this. So thinking in bets and understanding your fast and slow thinking is going to help make you a better leader, a better learner all day long. Now, this book is not short. It's not short and it's not easy. There's some great other ways to get to this a little bit more quickly. I'm going to move past this one kind of quickly. But because here's the deal. I think that one of the hallmarks of a leader's decisions right now is the ability to explain how you made the decision. What's the biggest fear everybody has about AI right now is that AI and algorithms are starting to make more and more decisions in our life. And as people go in and look at how they function, nobody can quite figure out how they're coming to some of their conclusions. Leaders are not going to have that benefit. You're not going to be able to just make a random decision in our future world filled with all the VUCA that we've got to make sense out of without being able to explain your thinking. And those two books, Thinking in Bets and Thinking Fast and Slow, will help you become a more deliberate decision maker so that you can explain your thinking. Okay, ideas are cumulative, right? Our minds can play tricks on us. We have to make decisions. We got to make good ones. We have to be able to explain them. So one of the best books about learning, here, a couple of quick books on learning themselves. There are three of them in a row that I want to talk about. So this guy is absolutely unbelievable, Scott Young, and he wrote a book called Ultra Learning. Now, in his book, he did some of the most amazing learning experiments on himself, like learning 3 languages in a year and learning to draw like with a good, like do portrait drawings in a month and learning all this stuff like in a really, really crazy way. There are more learning hacks in this book than I've almost ever encountered. So strongly recommend this. Speaking of violin, the second one is called The Science of Rapid Skill Acquisition. The ability to be able to learn, remember, and master new information and skills quickly. And then finally, because I'm going to break all four of these books down in a couple of simple pages. And then the self-learning blueprint, which is don't just try to learn something, make a plan of how to learn it, break it down into this is Andy Bailey, this has got Andy Bailey written all over it, which is make a plan, work the plan, be successful. A self-learning blueprint is all over it. So here are a couple of the things that they talk about, and I'll just go into it right like this. First and foremost, before you begin, you want to learn something. You want to learn to play the guitar. You want to learn to speak differently. You want to learn some programming language for your job. Whatever it is. You want to learn accounting. You got to choose a subject that you're naturally curious about. I'm more of a verbal person. For me to learn accounting would be like a living hell for me. I mean, it's just like there's not a chance
Me too.
I could ever do it well, right? It's just not me. And I just realized I'm going to have great partners on my team that can do this work for me. So first, I'm summarizing all these books pretty quickly. First step one, you got to draw a map. If you're going to actually go try to learn something like that's important to you, learning how to draw a map of what it is you want to learn. Okay, what is it I'm trying to do? As I said, you're trying to get a functional level of performance, right? You're not trying to be a concert pianist. You just want to be able to sit, if you want to play piano and you have this dream that in a couple of years you could sit down at a Christmas party at somebody's piano and you could play some Christmas tunes and everybody'd sit around and sing. That's a perfect goal. And by the way, that is a very, very attainable goal for a lot of people. So you draw a map. So what is it? I want to learn the piano. There are lots of ways to learn the piano. Do I need a teacher? Am I going to learn from books? Do I got to buy a piano to do it? What are the blank areas in the map that you don't know anything about? Like, do you have to learn music theory? Do you need to learn to read music? Do I need to carve out different types of practice time so I don't bother my family or my neighbors? So drawing a map becomes really critical. Again, summarizing all these books for you. Develop that deliberate learning, that learning practice, which I would describe as carving out times of your day when you're going to actively do some of your best learning. For me, I do my best learning in the morning. I have a really tough time at night. So if I wanted to learn something new musically, like I unwind playing music, but if I want to learn something new in music, like if I'm trying to learn a new song on a piano, I have to do it before noon. I know that, and I have to practice it, kind of multiple times before I become good at it. Discovering your learning hacks. And here are some of mine. I'm just going to share them with you. And it comes back to the idea of books. As I shared, I have all these books. I've talked about a lot of books. Before I read a book, and some, because like Andy and Vern Harnish and all these people are always talking about books and sending books to me saying, you got to read this book. I kind of look at the book at least 3 or 4 times before I will actually read it. Now, sometimes I buy a physical copy of the book because it's just easier to go through the table of contents. Sometimes I download it on my Kindle and I look at the table of contents. But before I do, I use one of these tools. I'll go to a podcast app. I use Spotify a little bit more than I use Apple Podcasts now. But what I've discovered, for a lot of books, like I think about the Danny Kahneman book, like when I first went through it, Danny Kahneman himself, Nobel Prize winner, did interview after interview after interview about his book during his press tour. His press agents made him do it. And so, by the way, as I was working out or I was on a walk or I was going shopping, I was listening to Danny Kahneman talking about his book. And what it did is, one thing, I was learning all of the context about the book, why he wrote it, what it was for, what he learned. And I was listening to it in his own voice. Now, I listen to podcasts at 1.5 speed, so it's a little fast. But I like it that way because now I get the context why the book was written. I subscribe to Get Abstract, which are book abstracts and summaries. I listen to Blinkist. If you haven't listened to Blinkist, that's another book summary site. There are some other book summary sites in addition. So when somebody gave me Danny Kahneman's Thinking Fast and Slow, it was a Christmas present for me from my wife. I listened to at least 5 interviews. I read summaries of it through a Get Abstract or Blinkist type thing. And then finally, only after all of those 3 do I read the book. And here's what happens. My retention is better because I've already been over the material a bunch more, and I'm thinking about the voice of that author in my head. I'm taking notes in a Kindle, and then I summarize the notes back in Evernote, which is the green elephant icon up there. And then my retention is higher. So I don't have that 10% learning retention out there. The other thing that I've discovered, and this goes both with a learning and a practice technique, I don't know how many people have ever heard of a Pomodoro. Pomodoro, there's actually some books on how to do a Pomodoro. A Pomodoro is to take 30-minute learning blocks, where what you do is you kind of set a timer, shut off all of your devices, you work for 25 minutes on a subject, and then you take a 5-minute break, no matter what. And so I break a lot of my learning down into those 25-minute on, 5-minute off hacks, because I just can't concentrate much longer than that. So those are my learning hacks, the way that I get information. So after drawing a map, remember, creating a deliberate learning practice, know what my hacks are, is I synthesize and I self-test. As I realized, the best couple of ways to self-test is I can take notes. Can I tell you what a book was about? How would I teach it? For me, the way I self-test is I try to teach the material to somebody else. And it's a great way to make things go a little bit faster. And then finally, identifying with and connecting with guides and coaches. Look, when I said find a subject that you really care about, if I have a strong recommendation, is to find a field where there are lots of guides and coaches. I've used guitar lessons as an example several times here. I've been playing guitar since I was 11 years old. I took lessons when I was young, but when I was in high school, I thought it was too cool to take lessons. So I used to just try to learn from a cassette tape. Well, I can't tell you how hard it is to learn to play Van Halen's Eruption from a cassette tape. It takes years. Well, guess what? There are at least 5 ways online right now between YouTube and other guitar, apps to be able to learn to play Van Halen's Eruption note for note, because there are lots of guides and teachers. There are just lots and lots and lots all over that subject. If you want to learn a programming language, if you want to learn to cook, if you want to learn anything like that, there's so many guides and coaches along the way. But my trick, quite honestly, is not just to get guides and coaches about the subject, is that I've kind of identified this group of what I kind of call super learners. And I talked about knowledge being cumulative. Every single person on this page, well, I've met almost all of them here, is some sort of unbelievable super learner. So you have Daniel Pink in the upper left, Yuval Noah Harari, Eric Weinstein, Jared Diamond, on down the line. These are people, by the way, the guy, by the way, in the bottom right in the glasses looks like a professor. His name is Tyler Cowen. I think he reads, I've heard like he reads an average of about 50 books a month with almost perfect retention. He has this incredible memory. Trust me, you're never going to read as many books as Tyler Cowen, but you can learn from Tyler Cowen about the stuff to read and about things to be thinking about and about major trends. So if learning is important to you, do learn. Use these techniques that I talked about. Find the guides, create a map, do practice, figure out what your hacks are. But my goodness, attach yourself to some big brains like these people out there, because that is how you're going to accelerate your learning hacks. It just works. Trust me when I say it works, because, and by the way, all of these people either are in podcasts or in all of these things. And I can tell you, when I met several of them, I'll end with just kind of one funny story. So Yuval Noah Harari wrote *Sapiens* and *Homo Deus* and 21 Questions for the 21st Century. He's the right next to Dan Pink in the upper left, second from the left at the top. Brilliant guy. I will tell you, I interviewed him for a YPO podcast in 2017, I guess it was, in Tel Aviv. Absolutely one of the most brilliant minds I've ever personally encountered, ever been in the room with and had a conversation with. Just super clear, quick answers, could explain things really simply, just practiced at dealing with very complex ideas. But I told him the one weird thing is I'd only ever heard him at 1.5 speed, because I had never listened to him at normal speed. And I thought, like, when he walked into the room, I thought he was going to be talking really fast to me like this. And I thought his voice was a little bit higher. And in fact, it wasn't. I could actually understand the things he was saying. So when I think about it, Andy, and I'll kind of drop out of the share there, is that learning is the skill that we all need in these VUCA times, in these times of volatility and uncertainty, complexity and ambiguity. we're going to be let out of this by people who take on learning, not just because it's easy or because that's something that you do when the the graphs are all going up easily to the right. You're going to take it on at all times, and you're going to be committed to lifelong learning, not just education, not just seeking credentials, but because we need to learn our way out of this. We need to come up with better explanations of things. We need to become better storytellers. We need to be able to pass wisdom, not just facts, on to the next generation. And I'm passionate about it, and I'll never stop doing it. So it's been super important to me, and it's how I've been able to create a pretty, I think, a pretty incredible life. So very grateful for all that I've learned, and I'll keep doing it. So with that, Andy, are there any other questions?
We'll wait for a second, see if any other questions pop in, but they're giving us the overview of why it's important and then breaking it down to how you go do it, and then give us like some tips to do it even quicker. Yeah. Hugely impactful on the group. Obviously the video will live for a long time. We can share it around. We got to get your book on that book list at some point very, very soon. Just the whole growth mindset and the best days are always ahead of us kind of mentality that you bring to every single day is really important for a lot of people to hear. That's true. We've talked about it for a long time. Even if it's just like a little ebook and we can get something.
Oh, don't worry, it's coming. It's coming. Yes, for anybody who's listening. So I had a full manuscript of a book called Boundless, the Boundless Leaders that I met, and the idea is that I believe everything that I've been able to accomplish in life has been about breaking through boundaries, because most of the boundaries we see are artificial in our lives. They're not actually real, and we can break through them. We can create incredible understanding and do cool things. I just didn't like the manuscript, so it's got to be edited or redone or broken up into pieces. And don't worry, it's coming.
All right, perfect. Well, we'll stay on that one. I also the one slide that like smacked me around was the love of practice. Yeah. Like falling in love with the process, which is incredibly hard for most people to do, and something that I struggle with from time to time as well. But I think that's like really important. And then tying that to presenting, presenting is really practice. So that makes it really important. Chip's got a question really quick. You mentioned plateaus. How do you, McKeel, recognize when you're at a plateau, and what was the last one that you broke through?
Yeah, I mean, thank you. It's all this idea of patience. And a book that I didn't put in there, it's called Mastery, and it talks a lot about having that patience for plateaus. And in the book, his name is Leonard. He was a martial artist, and so he early in his training, like, quickly tried to become a black belt, and as he was testing for his black belt, just got his butt kicked and got badly injured in the test, and quit for a while because he just thought he was right there. And he quit, and he realized he just had it all wrong. And it's not about being a black belt. It's about, mastery. And when he went back, and he ended up not only becoming a multi-degree black belt or whatever it was in Aikido, is, owning studios and all of these different things, it was to learn to be patient and to just recognize that someday you're going to practice, and you're just going to not feel like you did it one bit better than you did the day before. I speak publicly a lot, and, people say, wow, you're a good speaker. I'm like, well, gee, I'm the best judge of myself, and that was terrible. And so when you get really good at it, is that you realize pushing through is that you're the best judge. You have to give up the idea of other people judging you, and that you are going to be the one. If it's playing guitar, yep, I got that little thing today that I could never quite get before, and now it's just like easy. And so it's those types of things that are getting easier for me. I have some things that I've been working on. From a leadership perspective, I think right now we're living in this extraordinary period where top leaders need to show incredible EQ. Lots of people are hurting out there. Lots of people are feeling a lot of uncertainty. So for me, really breaking through that, that importance of being really present with people, not distracted, putting your devices away, so that you can kind of break through and just have people recognize that, wow, he or she was really listening to me. When I was sharing a story, rather than, being off in some sort of tangent. Those are just the things we have to be constantly working on. It's just constantly sharpening the saw.
Got one more too. It says, throughout the learning curve in your professional life, what factors have been the most difficult at the time to delegate assignments to other team members, other employees?
Yeah.
What factors have been the most difficult at the time to delegate assignments to other people?
Yeah, I mean, I've two things. For me professionally in my business, the parts that I've maybe struggled the most with is offloading relationships that I built. As we've scaled this business, I can't be the one meeting with everybody all the time. Finding people that I personally like to hand off key relationships with, not to totally hand them off, but to have them manage them a little bit more. I realized that it was a completely different type of hire. So for me, it wasn't just picking some functional leader to say, hey, you're now responsible for this. Like, it had to be somebody that I was willing to invest time in to become very friendly with personally. So, you know, dinners at my house, having that drink with them, exercising with them, going for a bike ride, whatever it is, became super important because there were relationships that I built over a 30-year career. That was very difficult, and I haven't gotten it right every time. I've had people that I thought were great that went out and just pissed off somebody I consider a good friend out in our industry, and I had to reel it back in. It's frustrating. The other areas are communication. I I harbor my communication pretty strongly, but I also know I have to have other people communicate for me. So what I realized is taking the time to practice. So like you can't just rush it, even if it's somebody you like on your team, when they're going to go in and tell your story or your message or make your pitch, you got to sit there and say, hey, look, I'm going to book a call. I'm going to book a Zoom call and we're going to go through this. And I want to hear you pitch me as if you're me saying those words. And I'm going to give you feedback. It's so important to me that I just had to build in the time to hand those off. Sometimes I've gotten it, sometimes I haven't, but those are the areas when they don't go well, I feel like they reflect negatively on me personally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And probably the things from that we work really hard as leaders to get these things right early.
Yeah.
And we felt, that we've been the one that built that, and it's important to us. So
Right.
it's difficult to delegate.
And you, as you know, Andy, when you're an entrepreneur, you've done every role. You've sold, you've done the
Sure.
executive work, you've done everything. And the reality is, you probably could. And remember talking to you about your business. The first business, the pager business, is like you probably could do it better than anybody else. You could probably do any single piece of it better than anybody else. But that's not practical.
That's
Your
right.
job is to scale yourself with other people. So you got to be a person that's great at telling stories, great at explaining why, great at relating to others. And it's not, and let's face it, in a world right now where a lot of people, most everybody's working remotely and they're all working from home, I don't believe in work-life balance. I think you get life, period. And some of your life you're paid for and some of your life you're paying for. And so, the job is, as a leader, is to blend those worlds together so that you get great team members out there doing cool stuff for you.
Well, man, we're over time. We could go on for a long time here, and I know you've got a busy day, but I really, really, really appreciate you being here, talking to this group. Again, the video will be shared. We do have recordings. It'll be on the blog probably this afternoon or tomorrow. And one of the things that we do, McKeel, is we promote and work with a company called Tiny Superheroes. They put these little tiny superhero capes on children that are dealing with disabilities and illness. So
Awesome.
we're going to sponsor some kids in Hagerty's name to get some of these capes. And we'll follow up on that so you know kind of what happened there. We really appreciate you being here with us today.
They are heroes, and as is everybody who listens into these things. I just admire the fact that people are willing to invest their time to learn themselves, and hopefully they'll all, take at least a few ideas away from this to be able to go improve their learning and keep making the world a better place. So, Andy, as always, you do awesome stuff, and I'm just grateful to be here.
All right, brother. I'll see you soon. Thank you, man.
Bye-bye.